The other night, I was sitting in a high-end coffee shop, and I was watching this young man at the corner table. He had the latest 2025 flagship phone in one hand and a high-spec tablet propped up right in front of him. And, to any observer from even 20 years ago, this guy was living in a literal paradise. He's surrounded by climate-controlled comfort, holding the sum of human knowledge in his palm, and within 30 seconds, he'd ordered a gourmet meal on an app that would just arrive without him ever having to stand up. He looked perfectly connected, His screen was flashing with his constant stream of notifications and likes and these vibrant short-form videos. But as I watched him, something just felt deeply off. Despite all that digital activity, his face was just completely vacant. It was a kind of hollow, glazed expression that looked less like he was relaxing and more like he was in a trance. He wasn't smiling at the likes or anything. He was just processing them. Then his phone buzzed. It was a news alert about the global loneliness epidemic and the crashing birth rates of 2025. He didn't even pause. He just swiped it away with his practiced, cynical flick of his thumb, his eyes already searching for the next dopamine hit. So I actually struck up a brief conversation with him as he was leaving. And when I mentioned that news report he just swiped past, he gave this short, dry laugh. He said, "Why would I worry about the collapse of society?" He gestures to his phone. "Everything I need is right here. Real life is just high maintenance. People are complicated. This is easy." And he said it with this chilling level of casualness, almost like opting out of human biology was just a more efficient software update. That interaction, I think, it just perfectly captures this strange, quiet crisis we find ourselves in. We've finally built the utopia our ancestors dreamed of, a world of infinite calories, instant entertainment, and zero physical danger. But in doing so, we've accidentally triggered what some might call a behavioral sink. We are running Stone Age software on digital age hardware, and the system is starting to throw these error messages that we can no longer afford to just swipe away. It really makes you wonder, at what point does a perfect environment stop being a sanctuary and start becoming a trap?
That analogy is so important, especially that last part, the idea of a perfect environment becoming a trap. It leads us directly to the central metaphor for our deep dive today, which is the chilling legacy of John B. Calhoun's work.
Calhoun.
Calhoun was an American ethologist who, starting back in the 1960s, conducted this series of, highly controversial and really influential experiments on crowding and social density in rodents.
And the most famous one was Universe 25.
Universe 25, that's the one.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to understand what he was trying to figure out. It wasn't just about how rodents handle tight spaces.
No, he was deliberately getting rid of all the normal problems.
Exactly. He was eliminating every single variable that normally causes societal stress, hunger, disease, predators. He designed a total utopia to see what would happen when all our material needs were completely solved.
So tell us about this paradise he built. What did it actually look like?
Well, Universe 25 was designed to be a perfect habitat, a structure of just pure abundance. It was a 9-foot square metal pen, meticulously engineered with multiple levels, ramps, and over 256 individual nesting boxes.
Wow, 256.
Yeah, plenty of apartments. They introduced 4 pairs of mice initially, and they set them up in an environment that provided for every conceivable material necessity.
So unlimited food, water.
Unlimited, perfectly managed access to food, fresh water, veterinary medical care, constant temperature control. It was totally safe from predators. The whole setup was intentionally built to support a colony of up to 5,000 individuals. The idea was to completely eliminate the traditional survival stressors.
Okay, so on paper, this is mouse heaven. The colony should have just thrived indefinitely, grown to its physical limits. What was the timeline? Where did the growth actually top out?
Well, the initial phases were, as you'd expect, pretty positive. After a brief adaptation period, they went into this period of rapid exponential growth. The population was doubling roughly every 55 days.
So far, so good.
But here's the crucial part. They never came close to that resource limit. The population peaked around day 315, and it only hit about 600 individuals.
Wait, 600? In a place designed for 5,000.
600. And the social structures had already begun to completely unravel well before they even hit that peak.
That just fundamentally challenges the old ideas, right? The idea that crowding and stress are purely about physical space and fighting over food. It suggests the collapse was psychological. It was social.
Absolutely. That is Calhoun's defining insight. The collapse was behavioral, not biological or resource-driven. Once they reached that peak, the entire colony followed this distinct, irreversible decline.
How long did that take?
Well, by day 560, mating had virtually stopped. The population, which still had plenty of food and empty space available in other parts of the enclosure, began its slow, inevitable slide toward total extinction.
So the colony was basically dead long before the last mouse died.
Functionally dead. The last mouse perished around day 920.
And that idea, functional death, that's the behavioral sink. Let's really unpack the specific behaviors. What started to break down in the rats' daily lives?
It was systemic. It affected every single social role. First, spatial organization just collapsed. Even though the enclosure had all these identical levels and feeding stations, the rats started to accumulate in a few specific dense areas.
They chose to be crowded.
They actively chose it. You'd see 20 or 30 rats crammed around one feeder fighting for space, while an identical feeder just across the corridor was completely empty. It was a self-imposed pressure cooker.
And what happened inside those pressure cookers?
The basic functional behaviors that define a stable society just vanished. The female mice were the first to show really severe pathology. They lost their ability to build proper nests, sometimes just scattering their nesting material around.
And worse.
Much worse. They lost their maternal instincts. They would sometimes abandon their young while carrying them or even attack them. Infant mortality rates just skyrocketed, reaching a catastrophic 96% in some of the late-stage trials.
96%. So the very foundation of generational continuity was destroyed, not by a disease, but by a lack of behavioral competence.
Exactly. And the males, they showed equally disturbing dysfunctions. 3 clear male types sort of emerged from the chaos.
Okay.
First, you had the aggressive alpha males, constantly fighting for dominance and territory, even though that territory was meaningless since the space was ignored. Then you had these hyper-aggressive, almost psychopathic males. Calhoun called them the probers.
The probers. What do they do?
These individuals moved relentlessly through the dense areas, pursuing females indiscriminately, engaging in highly violent behavior, and horrifically resorting to cannibalizing the abandoned pups.
So just pure chaotic violence, completely untethered from any social structure.
It was. But perhaps the most haunting group, and the one that holds the biggest metaphor for us today, was the emergence of the beautiful ones.
The ones who just completely checked out.
They were the isolates. They retreated physically and socially, avoiding all conflict, all interaction. They became obsessively focused on self-grooming. Their coats were immaculate, making them look physically perfect, which is where the name comes from.
So they were healthy, but...
They showed zero interest in social, sexual, or aggressive interactions. They were just spectators in their own environment, pristine and solitary. Physically perfect, but utterly, completely inert.
The image of the beautiful ones is honestly terrifying. It's a perfect picture of nihilistic contentment. They opted out of life. They didn't die of starvation. They died from a loss of social function and purpose.
And Calhoun synthesized this whole collapse into one term: death squared.
Death squared.
The colony didn't succumb to a single physical threat. The first death was behavioral, the loss of roles, the end of generativity, the apathy. The second death was the physical extinction that just inevitably followed after that social structure dissolved. The paradox is so clear. The rats died of life being too easy.
That concept, death squared, that's our launch pad for looking at our own society. We are running this Stone Age software in a high-tech reality. And we had to start by looking at the core machinery that's being exploited. Our neurobiology, specifically the dopamine system.
Exactly. If we accept the thesis of the behavioral sink, we have to look at how our modern environment acts as that utopia that eliminates necessary struggle and hijacks our primal drives.
This is the evolutionary mismatch.
It's the core thesis, the mismatch between our Pleistocene neurobiology and the 2025 digital world. Our brains haven't evolved significantly in the last 10,000 years, certainly not fast enough to handle this level of novel instant stimulation. Our neural pathways are optimized for a world where effort is directly tied to reward, and those rewards are usually delayed.
And we absolutely have to correct the common idea about dopamine. It's not just the pleasure chemical. That's a huge oversimplification.
It's a massive oversimplification. If dopamine was just about pleasure, you'd take a bite of food, feel good, and then stop. Modern neuroscience makes it really clear that dopamine's main function isn't in the feeling of pleasure itself, the liking, but overwhelmingly in the motivational drive of wanting, of anticipation, of seeking.
It's the get up and go chemical.
That's a great way to put it. It's the engine that compels us towards survival essential behaviors: hunting, mating, finding shelter. It doesn't signal how good the reward felt, but how important it is to go get it again.
So it's about motivation, not just enjoyment.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it also crucially manages something called reward prediction error. If you anticipate a reward of, say, 5 units, but you receive 10, that spike in dopamine teaches your brain to update its expectations and seek out that behavior more aggressively next time. It's incredibly efficient for survival, but also incredibly vulnerable to exploitation by modern tech.
Okay, so this is where we linked the neurological reality back to what you see in society. This mismatch explains how these supernormal stimuli from social media algorithms can just hijack our ancestral reward circuits.
And produce exactly what we're seeing: maladaptive social withdrawal and loneliness.
So how does social validation play into this?
Social validation is, ancestrally, a primary survival reward. Being accepted by your tribe meant safety, resources, and mating opportunities. It was life or death.
Right.
Social media platforms leverage that crucial drive by transforming that primal social regard, likes, shares, comments, into these discrete, measurable, abstract units. These units act as a supernormal stimulus.
A supernormal stimulus, that's a concept from mythology.
It is. It's where an exaggerated version of a natural stimulus gets a stronger response than the natural one would. Think of a bird that prefers to sit on a giant, brightly colored fake egg instead of its own smaller, naturally colored one.
It's a signal our survival instinct just can't ignore. In ancestral life, social feedback was rare, it was nuanced, it was delayed. Now it's constant, quantifiable, and abstract.
Exactly. Instead of getting a subtle look of approval from one person in your tribe, you get a constant stream of numbers from hundreds of strangers. It just overwhelms the system. But the crucial question is, do we have proof? Is a like really equivalent to a primary reward, like food in the brain?
What does the data tell us? What do the scans show?
The data is pretty clear. Functional MRI, or fMRI, studies consistently show that anticipating or receiving positive feedback on social media triggers strong activation in the nucleus accumbens, the animanta and the ventral striatum.
And those are the big players in the brain's reward system.
They're the absolute core components of the brain's mesolimbic pathway. This is the exact same reward circuitry that's activated by primary rewards like food, money, or critically highly addictive substances. The brain biologically processes a digital notification as a high-stakes, concrete reward signal.
So it's fundamentally indistinguishable from a successful hunt.
In terms of the core mechanism, yes. And this is where the comparison with the behavioral sync gets really specific. It's not just that the stimulus exists, it's the algorithmic amplification. They don't just provide the drug, they create a custom-tailored delivery system for it.
The amplification is the key. That's what makes it different from, say, watching TV.
It's the key differentiator. AI-powered algorithms are optimized for one thing and one thing only: maximizing continuous engagement. And they do this by learning your specific neural reward profile, what types of content, what kind of feedback, and at what specific timing generates the biggest dopaminergic spike for you.
So they're effectively creating a personalized digital drug.
That's exactly what it is. And this self-reinforcing behavioral pattern becomes incredibly difficult to break because the gratification is so precisely tailored and so rapidly delivered.
If the system is constantly being flooded by this personalized stream of hyper rewards, what are the long-term changes? Does the brain build up a tolerance like it does with chemical addictions?
It leads directly to neuroadaptation. It's a process we see all the time in substance use disorders. Chronic overstimulation of the reward pathway can cause the brain to downregulate the available dopamine receptors, specifically the D2 receptors in the striatum.
It's like turning down the volume because the music is always too loud.
Perfect analogy. Or the house lights becoming less sensitive because the sun is always shining too brightly. The signal is still coming in, but the receiving mechanism becomes less sensitive. You need more stimulus to get the same feeling of satisfaction.
And we can see this in brain scans of heavy social media users.
We can. Neuroimaging studies confirm this finding in individuals diagnosed with internet addiction and problematic social media use. It mirrors the findings in substance abusers and pathological gamblers. And this downregulation results in what we call Reward Deficiency Syndrome.
Reward Deficiency Syndrome.
Yeah.
And what does that look like in real life?
It means the brain's reward circuits become desensitized. Natural, real-world rewards, like a slow, deep conversation with a friend, or hiking in nature, or spending months mastering a skill, they're inherently delayed, they're variable, and they're less intense.
So they start to feel boring.
They become devalued, they feel dull and unstimulating compared to the hyper-rewards of the digital world. This leads directly to anhedonia, a diminished capacity for pleasure, and it encourages the social withdrawal that characterizes problematic use. The less rewarding the real world seems, the deeper the digital dependence becomes.
Creating a powerful feedback loop. It's the isolation of the beautiful ones, but on a massive scale.
A perfect parallel. And that digital dependence, that constant seeking, is locked in place not just by the chemistry, but by the very architecture of the platforms, the variable reinforcement schedules.
This pure behavioral psychology, B.F. Skinner stuff, but weaponized for engagement.
Precisely. The design of modern social platforms relies so heavily on these VR schedules, and they are incredibly effective at creating compulsive, lasting behaviors. The best real-world example is a slot machine.
Or loot boxes in video games.
Exactly. The key is that the reward, whether it's a like, a notification, or a viral post, is intermittent and unpredictable. You know a reward is coming eventually, but you have no idea when.
And it's that uncertainty that keeps the seeking engine running at maximum speed.
That is the entire mechanism. Research shows that the highest and most sustained release of dopamine occurs not when you get the reward, but during the anticipation period, while the brain is waiting to find out if the next scroll, the next refresh, the next tap is going to yield a hit.
So the system is designed to keep you searching.
It compels you to check continuously, just in case the next interaction is the big one. It drives continuous engagement far more effectively than a fixed, predictable schedule ever could.
Okay, so if we're constantly training our brains on this digital slot machine, what are the cognitive consequences for things like sustained attention and focus?
It fundamentally reshapes your attentional and motivational systems through neuroplasticity. The brain adapts to what it's rewarded for. And by constantly rewarding these quick, low-effort, novelty-seeking actions via VR schedules, the brain is trained to prioritize these short, unpredictable bursts of information.
Which means that when you sit down for a task that requires sustained, goal-oriented, focus-like deep work, or reading a complex book,
your brain finds it unstimulating. It finds it intensely dull, precisely because that reward pathway has been desensitized and retrained to expect rapid randomized hits. Tasks with delayed rewards become incredibly difficult.
So it directly contributes to drops in concentration.
Measurable drops. It weakens executive functions like inhibitory control and increases cognitive fragmentation. This isn't just you having core discipline, it's a structural adaptation to the demands of the digital environment you're in.
And this must be even more pronounced in younger people, right? In adolescence.
Yeah. Oh, that's a critical point. The adolescent brain is at a period of heightened risk because the underlying biology is, well, it's mismatched during development. The subcortical reward systems, which include the NACAC, become hyper-responsive to rewarding stimuli early in puberty.
But the part of the brain that controls those impulses is still under construction.
Exactly. You contrast that with the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for top-down control, for inhibition, for planning, which continues to mature well into the early 20s.
So you have a turbocharged reward-seeking system paired with a developing braking system.
A perfect description. And this maturational imbalance makes adolescents biologically hypersensitive to social feedback. And social media provides a constant, measurable stream of exactly that, making it uniquely powerful and uniquely addictive for the adolescent brain.
So if we look at the actual functional and structural changes in the brain from what we're calling problematic social media use, how closely does it really align with what we define as a chemical addiction? Is it just a bad habit or is it more?
The convergence is stunning. Neuroimaging research shows structural and functional changes that are remarkably similar to established substance use disorders.
For example?
Functionally, a key feature of any addiction is a heightened reaction to cues. Studies using fMRI show that when problematic users are exposed to social media cues, like the specific color or logo of an app, there is significant sustained activation in key craving and impulse regulation areas.
Which areas are we talking about?
We're talking about areas like the anterior cingulate cortex and the orbitofrontal cortex. These are the regions that, when they're dysregulated, drive the obsessive thinking and compulsive seeking that you see in drug or gambling addiction. The brain is reacting to an app logo the way a nicotine addict reacts to the sight of a cigarette.
What about the actual physical structure of the brain? Are we seeing permanent physical alterations here?
Yes. Chronic problematic social media use is linked to measurable, lasting structural changes, specifically reductions in gray matter volume, the part of the brain that contains the neuronal cell bodies.
So the brain is physically shrinking in certain areas?
In a sense, yes. These reductions in gray matter volume, or GMV, are consistently found in three key areas: the prefrontal cortex, which is vital for executive functions, the amygdala for emotional processing, and the striatum, which is crucial for habit formation.
That pattern, PFC, amygdala, striatum, that has to be the smoking gun.
It really is. These specific patterns of GMB reduction closely resemble the structural brain changes we observe in long-term substance use disorders and pathological gambling. It provides a strong neuroanatomical basis for classifying this as a true behavioral addiction.
And one that physically alters the cognitive machinery responsible for impulse control.
That's the behavioral consequence. Reduced prefrontal cortex volume is directly associated with impaired decision-making and poor impulse control. Behaviorally, this is what it looks like when you can't resist checking notifications, can't stop scrolling, can't disengage to focus on a critical task.
And becomes a cycle.
It creates a deeply embedded cycle. If you have weak initial executive function, you're more susceptible to the instant rewards of social media. And then the resulting excessive use further weakens your executive function, which deepens the dependence. It's a perfect loop for the behavioral sink.
This overwhelming internal pressure, the addiction, the distraction, the devaluation of real rewards, it must feed into the profound level of generalized anxiety we're seeing everywhere. It's hard to find someone who isn't wrestling with chronic worry.
Indeed. And this takes us right into the prevalence of chronic worry, which is the hallmark of generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD.
GED, right.
It's defined by excessive, uncontrollable worry about everyday things and has to persist for 6 months or more.
Right.
We're talking about symptoms like restlessness, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and often these really pervasive physical manifestations like muscle tension and sleep disturbances.
They're all physical expressions of a threat response system that is just perpetually running hot.
That's all it is. And neurologically, GAD involves heightened activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm center, and the prefrontal cortex, which is trying to make sense of this constant feeling of danger. But we have to understand why evolution would design us to worry so much.
Which brings us to a concept that completely reframes anxiety, the smoke detector principle.
This concept, championed by evolutionary psychology, is so crucial for understanding why you feel the way you do. It proposes that biological defenses like anxiety or the fight-or-flight response should always err on the side of false alarms.
And that's based on a simple cost-benefit analysis from our ancestral past.
Exactly. For a prehistoric human, what was the cost of a false alarm? Say you unnecessarily worry about a rustle in the grass, or you flee when there was no actual predator. The cost was typically pretty low. You wasted a little energy, maybe lost a few minutes of foraging time.
But the cost of a missed response?
Catastrophic. Failing to detect a real lethal threat meant death. It meant the complete failure to pass on your genes. So natural selection tuned the system to be hypervigilant, accepting many false alarms as the price of survival.
So our anxiety is a feature, not a bug. It's designed to overreact.
Precisely. It's not designed for your comfort. It's designed for your survival optimization. And if you look at the math behind it, it becomes remarkably clear. Imagine a scenario where the cost of harm, say, being eaten, is 20 times greater than the cost of defense running away unnecessarily.
Okay.
In that situation, the optimal defensive system should activate whenever the probability of harm is only 5%.
So 95% of the time, the defense is unnecessary, but it's still the adaptive response.
Exactly. And if the ratio shifts further, say the cost of harm is 1,000 times the cost of defense, the optimal system must trigger the defense whenever the probability of harm is only 0.1%. In that scenario, 999 out of 1,000 expressions of anxiety would be false alarms, yet they are still optimal for survival.
That's why we're walking around feeling constantly anxious. Our system is running on settings optimized for a far more dangerous past, and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
It's over-responding to low-probability, high-cost threats.
So that explains the mechanism. But the digital age is providing us with inputs that constantly trigger this overtuned system. What happens when that Stone Age vigilance meets the modern world?
You get the digital mismatch. That Stone Age brain's hypervigilance, designed to watch for a lion behind a tree, is now faced with modern stressors that are abstract, pervasive, and completely unresolvable.
Things like global threat reports, constant political conflict filtered through algorithmic urgency, economic instability,
and critically, the unprecedented social atomization and weak tie connectivity of the digital age.
It's the constant, unresolvable nature of modern stress that keeps the smoke detector blaring.
Exactly. We may have minimized catastrophic physical risk, but we have maximized chronic psychological input. And that input is often optimized by algorithms to trigger fear and outrage to keep us engaged.
And this constant vigilance feeds back into our problematic digital use, right? Creating a vicious cycle.
Absolutely. There is a very high comorbidity between anxiety, stress, and problematic digital media use. The technology, while it offers a sense of connection, simultaneously contributes to the perpetual threat state through the constant pressure of social comparison, the fear of missing out, and the notification dependency. You're seeking comfort in the digital world and being constantly stressed by it at the same time.
Let's transition back to Calhoun's primary warning, the behavioral sink, and apply these behavioral and neurological pressures to the fundamental structures of human society, namely the collapse of generative roles.
This is where the quiet collapse truly manifests. We're observing the behavioral sink phenomenon not in mice, but in modern urban centers and advanced societies. The academic analysis here shows how high population density, combined with this artificial abundance and the elimination of necessary behavioral demands, is severely disrupting traditional parental investment strategies.
And ultimately reproductive decision-making models. We are seeing a generational recline, a loss of the drive toward generativity.
The evidence is undeniable and it's deep. It's not simply a shift in fertility rates, it's a cultural decision to opt out of family formation entirely. We see this in the declining birth rates, which are now well below the 2.1 replacement threshold in almost all advanced economies.
And in the generalized loss of relational stamina.
Yeah, exemplified by reduced frequency of physical intimacy across age groups. Society is signaling that the costs of generative effort raising children, maintaining deep relationships, creating a legacy, outweigh the personal instant rewards offered by the digital utopia.
Just like in the mouse utopia, the core functional roles that sustain society providing, protecting, caregiving are becoming inert or devalued. What happens when those traditional male and female roles become obsolete?
That ambiguity leads to profound behavioral disengagement. In the rat utopia, the males stopped defending territory because all resources were available everywhere. The females ceased to nurture their young because survival was guaranteed regardless of their effort.
And in human society.
When the environment provides such vast artificial abundance that it eliminates the necessity for cooperation or role-specific effort, those traditional behavioral demands just dissolve.
Which leads us right back to the most haunting pathology of all, the beautiful ones. What is the human parallel to the mice who were obsessed with grooming in isolation?
The phenomenon of the beautiful ones directly parallels the intense social media focus on curated performance, self-curation, and aesthetic polish over genuine depth and vulnerability. These mice were physically pristine but functionally inert. Their only activity was maintaining their appearance.
And today, the modern focus is on manufacturing a personal brand.
An avatar optimized for maximum engagement. This focus on identity, volatility, and performance, rather than on a stable identity grounded in accountability or contribution, it undermines the durable trust required for a generative culture.
The kind of trust you need to commit to long-term, high-stakes, shared projects like raising a family.
Exactly. When you are primarily a performer, you are less able to be a reliable partner or a committed parent.
That makes perfect sense. And this erosion of identity is made worse by our increasing dependence on technology, leading to cognitive and relational atrophy. We're outsourcing not just tasks, but our very ability to think.
You should consider the cognitive stagnation that comes from the rise of AI. Automation eliminates the need for mental effort across vast domains, from generating ideas to solving complex problems, and this risks eroding what psychologists call the strength model of self-control.
The idea that self-control and mental resilience are like a muscle that you have to exercise to keep strong.
Right. And if you never have to struggle to think, you lose the mental stamina to remain resilient when you must think deeply or solve a difficult problem on your own.
It contributes to a kind of cognitive paralysis that mirrors the behavioral paralysis in Calhoun's mice.
Precisely. They had every material need met, so they simply stopped exploring, innovating, or engaging in complex coordinated tasks. They stagnated. The human system, constantly fed instant answers and instant gratification, loses the capacity for generative struggle.
Now let's look at the ultimate consequence of this atrophy playing out in the most foundational aspect of society, courtship and mate selection. Digital platforms seem to be intensifying selective pressures to an absurd degree.
This brings us to the intersection of the behavioral sink with something called the Fisherian runaway effect.
Fisherian runaway, that's an evolutionary theory, right?
It is. It's where sexual selection creates a feedback loop. A male develops an exaggerated, sometimes detrimental display trait like the enormous tail of a peacock, simply because females prefer it. That preference then drives the trait to become more and more extreme, even if it doesn't help with general survival.
So digital dating platforms are like an accelerator for Bashirian runaways, reducing courtship to a gamified marketplace where superficial markers dominate everything.
Exactly. Traditional slow courtship allowed substantive traits, patience, fidelity, emotional stability, to become apparent over time. Digital platforms, however, function as short-term filters. The feedback loop between visual performance and algorithmic reward favors easily measurable superficial markers.
Things like attractive facial structure, curated style, radical self-presentation, high-status signaling.
And this evolutionary drift is profoundly decoupled from actual relational or reproductive success. A person who is highly successful on a dating app because of their aesthetic polish may lack the basic capacity for long-term commitment, yet the system rewards the polish.
This hyper-intensification of aesthetic criteria just raises the bar for entry dramatically.
It does. And as the selection criteria become hyper-intensified and superficial, more and more individuals, especially men who feel their traditional value proposition of providing and protecting is devalued by this artificial abundance, they simply conclude that the cost of modern dating outweighs the benefits.
And they disengage.
It creates a crisis of sexual and romantic disenfranchisement, which feeds directly back into the behavioral sink. Fewer stable relationships form, fewer children are born, and the necessary generational continuity is undermined. Reproduction has been culturally reframed as optional, burdensome, or even antithetical to personal fulfillment.
So the population doesn't crash from famine. It just reclines from a loss of behavioral vitality and a fundamental disinterest in the effort required to perpetuate itself.
That's the sink.
This entire deep dive has established that the modern decline is behavioral first, the first death in Calhoun's framework. We have to now synthesize this into a final understanding of the new terms of extinction.
Calhoun's death squared is the essential modern framework. Behavioral death, the cessation of generative activity, relational investment, and the necessary friction of social structure. It precedes the physical, biological collapse.
And we're seeing nations that are economically viable, maintaining high levels of wealth and infrastructure, yet they face chronic depopulation and widespread social withdrawal.
The youth disengagement, the widespread loneliness epidemic, the record low birth rates, these are the subtle metrics of the first death happening right now. It's extinction through comfort.
They are the quiet evidence.
Individuals retreat into curated safety, becoming the behavioral equivalents of the beautiful ones. They groom their online identities, they consume endless resources, but they cease to contribute meaningfully to generational continuity.
So cultural extinction now occurs not with fire and catastrophe, but with apathy and abstraction.
We scroll, we spectate, we consume, and critically, fewer people imagine themselves as ancestors or as active participants in the long game of human culture.
The paradox remains that collapse arises from success. We eliminated the meaningful struggle that gives life purpose and structure.
Exactly. Human ecological viability is jeopardized by an artificial, technologically mediated abundance that replaces natural rule formation and necessary behavioral struggle with simulated gratification. The collapse isn't inevitable, but it was contingent upon this environmental overabundance that eliminated behavioral necessity.
If you remove the need to struggle, you remove the motivation to build.
They do, which means the solution isn't merely technical or economic. It has to be a massive cultural and ecological shift. We need a fundamental redesign of our environment to foster necessary friction.
So we have to intentionally re-embed struggle.
We must intentionally redesign our environments and our cultural narratives to re-embed friction, generative struggle, and social investment. We need to create systems where effort yields tangible, real-world reward again, and where commitment and contribution are socially valued above curated performance. It requires a deliberate cultural choice to prioritize the difficult generative labor over the easy, addictive consumption.
So our flourishing really depends on it.
Human flourishing requires ecological participation and the rediscovery of action redefining health, not just as physical well-being or the absence of diagnosed disorders, but as the capacity to love, to labor, to imagine, and to reproduce meaning across time. Without behavioral vitality, no amount of material security can sustain us.